One of them was the United States unilaterally walking out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which is one of the worst blunders that any leader could have made, because those are exactly the most dangerous weapons to the world peace. That was Donald Trump's first term. And now they are deploying nuclear missiles in Britain, which, okay, they're going to be under US control. It's not something that the British can, launch at their discretion. But still, it does put world peace at risk. What is his intent with this? Does he want to go and start a nuclear war? Again, that is so idiotic that I can't help thinking there must be another rationale for that. And I think that maybe that rationale will be to provide a pretext for nuclear disarmament talks. We'll find out, but I don't know. Anyway, I think that Trump is fighting a very tough fight. Whether he has just rolled over for the deep state and made himself their errand boy, we will only know in time. But I'm not convinced. I think that a lot of what Trump does amounts to deception. Not deception of the Russians or Chinese, but deception of his allies and his deep state, which basically wants him dead. And I know I had a few days ago, I had a podcast with Susan Kokinda of the Promethean Action in the United States, and she's very active in Michigan Republican Party. So even people who say, oh, look, there's these documents and there's these defense doctrines and blah, blah, that still is not conclusive. We simply do not know that's really the case. And not only is it absolutely correct, it is very obvious, which is exactly the reason why I think that Trump's positioning doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And so then you come to the question, are these people completely stupid? Or are they playing a very different game from what they pretend to be playing? This is where my confusion comes from, because I see this as, this is so idiotic, they can't possibly mean this. Because if it's obvious to me, like how obvious is it going to be to Pentagon generals who have very detailed, precise information about what's going on? And like they're Patriots and THAADs and all these things. They were the world's most advanced weapon systems back in the early 1990s. But now it's 35 years later, and they can't stop Iranian missiles. They can't stop Yemeni missiles. They can't stop Russian missiles. Never mind these swarms of drones that are being developed at a very rapid pace. So you can't possibly stay rigidly entrenched in a Cold War mentality, and you can't be aware that you actually have no leg to stand on. If it runs its course, it's going to collapse. And so you have the choice of maybe we can push it over, collapse it deliberately, and create a level field for American manufacturers to compete. And so I think that this is something that Trump has stated explicitly, that this is his intention, and he's doing it. Only he's not doing it by saying, we're closing the United States to free trade. He's using all these daily events in the geopolitical arena to give himself the pretext to do what he wants to do anyway. And during our conversation, she told me two details that I thought were probably significant. This was in the late stages of the presidential elections. And she said that at the meeting they had at the Republican caucus, Trump actually explicitly invited the attendees to join him, and this is the words that she used, in a final battle against the global financier class. This is the words that she used, and according to her, this is exactly what Trump was saying to the attendees at this campaign event. And then another thing she told me was that during some of the recent meetings of his cabinet, he was making a point of referring to American geopolitical adversaries as our supposed enemies. And he was also saying the people that are perceived as our enemies. There's words have meaning, and why he chose to use these words, we don't know, but he did. And there must be a reason for that. And then to invite his supporters to join him in a final battle against the global financier elite, you wouldn't come up with that if you didn't mean it, because nobody's asking for this. You could always talk against the Democrats. You could always say that Obama and Biden, they're communists and this and that, and they brought us into war. You wouldn't need to come up with the statement, final battle against global financier elites. That came out of Trump's mouth, allegedly, but it's all for show. So it seems to me that the same thing is happening on the geopolitical arena, and the reason why it's happening is because there are very powerful political constituencies that need to be appeased. And rather than telling them, no, we're not going to attack Iran because that's stupid, they launch a fake attack and they call up Iranians and they say, look, we're terribly sorry, but we have to do this. We're going to drop a few bombs here and here. You have 2 days to, remove the crystal and the silverware so nothing gets damaged, but we have to do this anyway. And we understand that you're going to have to retaliate. So please be so kind to call us up first and tell us where exactly, so that we can move our soldiers out of harm's way. And then we're going to both retreat. We're going to do some more trash talk. We're going to declare victory. And all of these Zionist and evangelical fanatics are going to we can put them to sleep. And then we're going to talk other things. So it seems to me that the real politics are more in this vein than they are in the vein of actual hostilities. But the groups who want the real actual hostilities, they're real and they're powerful. And they are lobbying relentlessly in Israel, in the United States, in Europe, in London, and so forth. And you have to dodge those bullets, which is why I try to always think, what are they really doing? And we see what they're saying for public consumption, but they can't not see what we're all seeing. And so this is why when in the second half of June, when there was this buildup to U.S. attack on Iran, I thought, this is suicidal. This is completely idiotic. They can't do this, because the upside was nothing. If you get lucky, maybe you regime change Iran, but it's a long shot. But you have a downside risk of the situation completely going out of control, of you losing 2 or 3 aircraft carrier strike groups and getting 20 of your bases in the Middle East wiped out and some 60,000 soldiers. So they can't possibly mean this. And so I said at the time, either there's going to be a no attack, or we're going to get like a telegraphed, prearranged attack like in the World Wrestling Federation style, when you make a big show of violence, but nothing actually happens. And then I said, we will know for sure only when the Iranians retaliate, because it's going to be a telegraphed fake retaliation. And that's exactly what happened. And so this is where I'm looking at this war of words. I'm looking at everybody's trash talk, which you also get trash talk in World Wrestling Federation. And if you took it seriously, you would think, wow, these guys really hate each other and there's going to be a big fight here. This, again, is so colossally idiotic. It can't possibly be what it seems at the surface. And what it is, Trump taking advantage of politically expedient pretexts to do what he wanted to do anyway, and that is impose tariffs on foreign trade. And the reason he's doing that is not to punish China, to punish India, to punish Russia. He's doing that because he wants to create protective barriers for American manufacturers. This is what he's been saying for a long time. He wants to bring industry and manufacturing back to the United States. How do you do that? You impose tariffs against imported goods. And so now, a lot of people are saying, oh, he's creating a disaster because the price for that won't be paid by China and India and so forth. Obviously, that's the case. The price will be paid by U.S. importers and by the US consumer? Yes and no. The importers, Trump already wants out of the equation because he wants manufacturers instead of importers as the foundation of his economy. And then the US consumer will very quickly have the choice of buying US manufactured goods rather than imported goods. Now, this is going to cause inflation. Yes, that's true. But you're going to have inflation anyway. And it's not like this system of open free trade is sustainable. It's not sustainable anyhow. So preserving this doesn't make sense. Apart from that, there's his position, and his government's position has been consistent that the post-World War II global order is bad for the United States, that it's been weaponized against the United States, that the multipolar integrations are the new reality, and that the United States intends to embrace that new reality and work with other partners within a different geopolitical framework. Now, again, I have doubts whether Trump is even mentally capable of just being one among the peers, or whether he needs to be the top guy. And this is where I have a doubt. I don't have a doubt about whether he's just going back to where Barack Obama and Joe Biden and their cabinets left off. I don't think that's the case. And so now, as that is failing as well, they're trying with Azerbaijan, they're trying between India and Pakistan, now Cambodia and Thailand. Who knows, maybe they'll try the Koreas or wherever. These people are arsonists of peace. The more I study these conflicts, the more convinced I'm. The Balkans are going to be one of the crisis flashpoints if they can get a war going here. I'm becoming increasingly convinced that if you quarantine the British foreign policy establishment and their very extremely extensive network of non-government organizations and private contractors and diplomatic staff that are everywhere around the world and embedded in governments in these key flashpoints, that you would actually solve probably overnight greater than 90% of the whole world's problem. They are the arsonists of peace in the world. I don't think that Mrs. Kokinda would be lying about this. That would be very random. But I think that these statements have meaning, and I have to give Trump the benefit of the doubt that he actually means what he says. And then the implication is that he's taking on the most powerful people in the world. And how are you going to do that? They assassinated Abraham Lincoln, William McKinley, JFK, RFK, MLK. They attempted they made two assassination attempts at Trump. You're going to have to wage that war by deception. And that deception has to be convincing, right? And to be convincing, you can't whisper to everybody, oh, hey, look, I'm gonna screw them over. Here's what I'm going to do. You have to work basically like an undercover cop. Everybody has to assume that you're with the bad guys, that you're one of their key players. And that's the only way you're going to get to break the most important power nodes in those relationships. People often say that I give him too much credit. I don't know, because nobody knows. I'm just saying I have to consider this to be the case because it's possible. And as far as we know, it's a 50-50 thing. Either I'm right or I'm wrong. But nobody knows, because obviously there's a great deal of obfuscation and deception going on. Who said that the whole affair has been cooked up by British intelligence and by the CIA station in London, headed at the time by Gina Haspel, who was sent there by John Brennan. And so inevitably, the British hand in Russiagate will be uncovered and will be made public. And so this is extremely important, because you had this special relationship between Britain and the United States, which has been cultivated for many decades, practically since World War I, but especially since the Harry Truman presidency. And it's been cultivated extremely extensively. And Donald Trump is very aware of that. because Donald Trump understands what happened with Russiagate and where it comes from. Practically every player in Russiagate, aside from the DNC leadership, was a British intelligence asset. And this is still a thing, because this year, this April, one of the main protagonists of Russiagate, Christopher Steele, the man who drew up the dossier against Donald Trump, he actually took Trump to court in London and obtained a judgment in the British court against Donald Trump. And so Trump, this was in April of this year, so Trump is president already. So Trump, according to this judgment, is meant to pay out some nearly £700,000 to Christopher Steele. So he knows, he understands, he's aware of all this. And then Christopher Steele he's a big fish in the whole thing. It is too glib and shallow, and I think that these provocations are by now so obvious that I doubt that even Kaja Kallas would fall for it, let alone Donald Trump, who does have some intelligent and experienced people to advise him on all these things. And I think that at the moment, there is no question that Russia is winning the battle for Eurasia. They're winning the battle for control of Eastern Europe. And there's nothing the United States can do about this. The United States cannot reverse this. And so if you're looking at that situation, are you going to side with the loser, with the losers, not just Britain, but the whole EU and NATO? Or are you going to look to side with the winners and cut deals with them because they are in the driver's seat now? So if you want to get a seat at the table, you need to make nice with Russia and with China. And Trump is trying to make nice with Russia and China. In spite of this, I'm disappointed in Vladimir Putin. I give him 50 days, I give him 10 days, I give him 12 days. I don't think any of this matters a whole lot at all. And when the 12 days expire, then what is he going to do? I think he must know that there's nothing he can do, actually. And then he's been imposing tariffs left and right, secondary tariffs against people who dare to trade with Russia. Not to mention that in January of this year, and in the aftermath of the 100-year partnership agreement between Ukraine and the United Kingdom, that they've tried to bait Trump into providing a security guarantee for Ukraine with this really cheap, vulgar, rare earths resource hustle with Ukraine, where they caused Zelensky, the Brits basically prepared Zelensky to go to Washington and to offer Trump a $500 billion deal in Ukraine with these rare supposed mineral resources in order for him to provide a security guarantee to the Kiev government. It didn't work because he hasn't done it. He didn't give them the security guarantee. So that really does change the game. And I think it'll take time for us to really find out what Trump has up his sleeve. But I am quite convinced that things aren't what they seem. Remember, there was a war of words between him and Kim Jong-un, and there was a period of time where it seemed that the United States was going to go to war with North Korea, that they were going to bomb North Korea, but that didn't happen. Instead, at the very same time when he was engaged in that war of words, and it was usual Trump style, rash and vulgar and shooting nonsense off the hip through the social media. But at the same time, he said he sent a delegation of his representatives and military generals to South Korea and to China to prepare the ground to meet with Kim Jong-un. And then they held that meeting, and they had a good meeting, and they had a great relationship, and he was the first U.S. president to set foot into the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. And then we had the beginnings of peace emerge between the two Koreas. They started demining the demarcation lines. And so with respect to today's circumstances, I suspect that we are now in that period of the war of words. Trump just went to Scotland, to Britain, right, where he met with Ursula von der Leyen and he met with Keir Starmer. And I think that some of his statements were meant for that audience. And it makes it very obvious because now every individual European country will get to say, no, we do not accept this. And France, there's been very heavy criticism of this in France, in Hungary, in Germany. And I think that no amount of PR is going to make this okay. So I think that this will prove the moment when the EU ship struck the iceberg, to use the Titanic analogy. And so I think this is the important aspect of this deal, not because this deal will actually hold. It probably won't, but it'll be the apple of discord, which might ultimately lead the European Union to tear itself apart. And it might also prove the end of NATO, because, what now? NATO is going to be arming itself with U.S. weapons, even though United States commitment to NATO is on the wane. He's not just like some minor former MI6 agent. He was working directly under the guidance of Sir Richard Dearlove, who is the former MI6 head of the MI6. And then he was vetted by former British ambassador to Washington, Sir Kim Derrick. And before he was working on the dodgy dossier, Christopher Steele was involved in Brexit because they wanted to delegitimize Brexit. So Christopher Steele put together a dossier which supposedly he wanted to cast doubt on the results of the referendum by contriving a narrative where the Brexit referendum was rigged by the Russians, right? And before that, he was involved with Victoria Nuland on orchestrating the coup in Ukraine. So Christopher Steele has been all over this global geopolitical mess that is pushing us into World War III. And then he personally sued, personally or on behalf of his company, Orbis Business Intelligence, I think it's called. He sued Donald Trump and obtained a judgment against Donald Trump. Something for damages, reputational damage, whatever it was. But there's no way that Donald Trump is not keenly aware of the British role in this whole mess. No, Trump was not very effective at all. And it's not just North Korea. We know from Douglas McGregor, who was personally involved with this, that Trump had the intention of withdrawing U.S. troops from Afghanistan, that he wanted to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria and ultimately even from Europe, and that he has been sabotaged on all those fronts. And then we also know that he has been belted with lawfare, with legal action, with impeachment proceedings, practically through his whole term. And here's where things get extremely interesting, because it was Russiagate, right? He has been dragged through impeachment proceedings over Russiagate. He was being accused of being Vladimir Putin's puppet, that his presidency was practically delegitimized by casting him as the Russian Manchurian candidate. And this weakened his presidency. It sabotaged his intention to improve the relations with Russia and roll back the United States imperial engagements around the world. And now we've seen just this month actually, Tulsi Gabbard come out and disclose a whole bunch of really important documents regarding the Russiagate affair. And it is already inevitable, it's already discernible, but it's inevitable that the trail of investigations will lead to London. And this week, we already had the head of the Government Accountability Institute, Schweitzer, to give his allies, quote unquote, the impression that he's still on board with them, that he still considers them important allies. Why is he doing that? I think not because he's interested in going to war against Iran or Russia or bringing the United States back into being the empire's enforcement force, but because I think he wants to negotiate advantageous deals for the United States. He wants to sell them a lot of U.S. weapons, and so you're not going to do that if you give them a clear definitive signal that you're abandoning them and that you're no longer their ally. Because then they're going to turn inward. They're going to be starting to develop their own weapon systems, and they're no longer going to be as dependent on the United States as they are. At the moment, they still look at Trump as their daddy. They still want favors from him. They're still willing to twist themselves into a pretzels to get favor with Trump and with the United States. And so I think that he's exploiting this. And we've seen that he's been very effective at exploiting this in his meeting with Ursula von der Leyen, who accepted a total and complete humiliation at Trump's hands. And so I think this is the game he's playing.